Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode 26, Tips and Tricks. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Coran. What have you been up to this week, Mike?
Yeah, Matt. So this week I've kind of been doing a lot of client work, and also, I don't know, you and I were kind of doing a little bit of work on No BS News. That's kind of coming into fruition. Again, you can go visit it right now in kind of the quote unquote demo mode at nobsnewsforreddit.com. Just check it out. Just keep in mind that not everything's finalized, and there's some like ad placement placeholders where we're waiting for ad placement. I'm sure that Matt will kind of get into that right now on what he's been up to this week. So what about you, Matt?
Yeah, so I've been doing those publishing steps, like you said, with No BS News, and one of the things that we're really struggling with is, like, we're really trying to use this project to have our first monetized app on the App Store, specifically on the Google Play Store, and while doing that, as we've already discussed, it's a PWA that we're putting on the web store or on the Play Store, so it's like a whole experience. And one of the things that we thought was going to be straightforward was going to get AdSense, because we've had AdSense on old sites before. However, one of our old sites, which is still up, freephotoshamilton.ca, I think it's .ca, just Google Free Photos Hamilton, it'll come up. But anyway, or one of our old websites, Free Photos Hamilton, used to have AdSense, and then we kind of let it lapse because we don't really keep that project up anymore. Other than don't maintain it kind of thing. And I kept adding ad units to our AdSense thing because we were able to log in, and it really didn't seem like it was too big of a deal. And then for whatever reason, and I don't know what this reason is at all, our sites menu disappeared. There's some speculation in the forums, and again, I'm not super invested in why this particularly happened, but I can't add sites to our I can't add new websites, which is in a menu called Sites on AdSense. This is layers deep, as you can kind of tell. And basically what happened was I noticed that it was asking for my phone number after we had done the address verification. The address verification was outlined in red, which was sort of an alert, whoa, look out. And so I didn't really notice this one because it was kind of blended into the UI. So I typed in my phone number, whatever, got the code, did that, and then it was oh, you're activating your account. I had to fill out a form, but most of it was already filled out for Free Photos Hamilton. So when I looked up that, and I'm not an expert here, clearly, so if I'm saying stuff wrong, it's because I'm new to it, but basically it had all our Free Photos Hamilton stuff all grayed out. It was, you had already entered this, and this is this is your information in this form. Is this okay? Do you want to submit? And so I submitted, and it said, okay, we found your ad code on your website and you're good to go. Unfortunately, all that stuff was added via a plugin or two, and one of them was the official Google AdSense plugin for WordPress, which is deprecated as far as I know. So anyway, so we let it, it verified, and it said it was going to activate our account in, a day or less. It has that warning there, whatever. It says usually a day or less kind of thing. So we were waiting, and we waited over a day. And then I was well, the first time it got approved, it was much faster. And so this set off this whole thing where I went onto the site and I tried to update it. So because I thought maybe we needed to have ad units running. So I wanted to get one ad unit running. I had to update a bunch of plugins, which broke some stuff. If you go on there now, or as of me recording this, there's some stuff that's very minorly broken, but I'm going to have to actually go into an old project that we don't support anymore, invest time in that to try to fix it so that we hopefully get approved. And the worst part about this is that this is all in an attempt to get access to that sites menu, because in our sites menu after this, there should be Free Photos Hamilton as one of those entries. But then I need to add this new, no BS News for Reddit.com. I need to add that as one of the sites, and then I have to wait for approval on that, is how I understand it. So I went on the forums, and some people from 2018 in December, so recently, said that they had been waiting approximately 2 weeks, and they said that some places are still a day, but they said some countries, and we're not in the U.S., so and this is all assumption, I assume the U.S. is probably still the 24 hours or whatever it is, or the less than 24-hour period, even though ours does say that, unless we're doing something wrong, which we could be, because I'm trying everything at this stage, clearly. Basically, we're still waiting for approval days later, and people are saying it's going to take possibly 2 weeks. And if that's the case, then it's another 2 weeks for ads on No BS News. So now I'm gonna basically my plan of attack is to organize all this is I'm gonna try to fix up Free Photos Hamilton just such that it has like a modern standard in terms of WordPress. It's gonna be all up to date as far as it needs to be. I'm gonna try to run one ad unit on the top, and I'm gonna whatever, like our ad code is in there to identify like what we want. Because there's like an official identifier, and then you add ad units. So I want to have one ad unit running because I got that first part done. Hopefully that helps push it along. I have a feeling that they haven't even looked at it yet. I don't know. And then once that is done, then we'll be able to hopefully apply for no BS News. But I don't think that's going to take very long in terms of preparing the WordPress part. So I'm going to prepare the WordPress part, get everything just such that it is acceptable for ads and whatever, as far as my knowledge. And then I'm going to be going and looking at alternatives for the website to try to see if I can, in terms of monetization, to try to see if I can get out of this week-long thing, because this was a 24-hour challenge that was supposed to be well on the store already, and we're literally just being held up by like a process, not even something technical, as far as I'm aware, anyway. And from what I looked up, again, I just looked this up, so please correct me if I'm wrong, hit me with a DM on Instagram or a message on Twitter, because like I am new to this sort of advanced AdSense stuff. But basically, we can't email them for help because we don't make a certain amount. And that's like right in their documentation. So it's like once you hit a certain amount of income, whatever that rate is, which I do not know what it is, or whatever that rate is, which is 0 right now for us, then you're eligible for email support. And so I can't really do anything except for go on the forums, and which people are already asking about it anyway. So I'm kind of in limbo at the moment. Again, if you guys have any tips, tricks, or anything additional, like any monetization tips, anything, please send us a message on any of those social media, because I'll be glad to kind of have a discussion with someone who is experienced in this sort of area, especially monetizing PWAs, because we want this thing to be a fully fledged, monetized, working app if we can. However, let's jump into this episode because we are in a bit of a rush today. I got to drive some people to the hospital later today, so. Let's just jump right in here. So this episode is going to cover our tips and tricks. Basically, I'm going to have a segment. Mike's going to have a segment. So segment number 1, Matt's tips and tricks. And then segment number 2 is going to be Mike's tips and tricks. I'm going to be focusing on things like CSS and server infrastructure and that type of thing. And Mike is going to be focusing on using various like JS tips and that type of thing and some other procedural stuff. And then, of course, our recurring segment, Web News, which is software as a service, talking about those pesky subscription fees that are slowly invading all of our credit card statements. But let's jump right in here to the very first segment. Segment number 1, Matt's tips and tricks. So the very first part here is going to be server/hosting management. So I'm going to be talking generically here, kind of as if you have either cPanel access or CLI access, or whether you have your own, server and you've installed all this yourself. These are just sort of generic tips and tricks that you can use. Some of them will apply to cPanel, some won't, etc. Just, use it based on the context that you have. But basically, always keep a backup and database. Always back up files and databases that you won't be able to get back into their existing state. So common things like this include things like a WordPress update. So like a plugin. If you're really unsure about a plugin update, you should really just do like a full backup. Worst case scenario, you can always delete the backup a couple days down the road if everything is running smoothly. Whatever your procedure is, some people do a couple weeks, some people do a week, some people do 72 hours. If you update and it's running fine, then you just delete the other one, whatever. Also, if you're migrating to a new server/host, so oftentimes there's like a shutdown that will happen on one of those ends, usually the old host, and generally speaking, there will often be times where where it just shuts it down, you lose access to that other one like a little bit faster than you thought, especially if this is a custom solution. Like a lot of modern hosts, you usually just pay out the month, and like if you're just using a generic hosting service, you just pay out the month, and then that's it. And you just kind of have the rest of the month, and when the shutdown's going to happen. But it's still a good idea just to pull those files off, because worst case, if something happens where like you get called away and you can't do the migration at the time that you planned, at least you have the files and you're able to just upload the new files to the new server when it's convenient for you. This also includes like if you're testing a new feature. So if you're testing like a new major feature, generally it has to be a major feature. If you're just adding a social media link, generally you're okay. But if you're testing a new major feature, you really should like actually take a full backup, or at least a backup of those files that you're editing. Again, use this according to your context, according to your experience with whatever you're using. If it's WordPress and you're simply installing a new plugin that isn't really affecting other plugins, and it breaks your whole site, all you have to do is deactivate it, more or less, as long as you have access to that admin panel. But if you think you potentially could lose access to that admin panel, maybe you should be backing it up. And in WordPress, especially if you're new to it, and we're not any WordPress experts, but we do have a fair amount of experience with it. In terms of WordPress, you really should be like when you're first starting out and you're just learning about plugins and that, I'd be taking a backup pretty often, depending on how much work you're doing. And like a lot of these backups are going to be useless and quite large, like for you specifically, but just look up how to do the proper backup procedures so that it becomes second nature. And then just make your own folder structure so you understand all that stuff. Like really bang out your backup procedure so that you're not annoyed by it down the line. So you're just able to just be like, I need to do this, I need to back it up. And you already have a file system and a procedure and a proper workflow already set up and ready. So it's just basically muscle memory at that point. Also, if you're adding something that a client has requested, but you personally don't think it'll work out, which will often result in a rollback. So the client will actually say, hey, I don't like this actually, like, can we go back? Sometimes it's easy to do. Obviously, if it's a couple social media links, like I mentioned, you just, hide those or delete them or whatever they want done until they fix it, or maybe they just want the feature gone entirely. But if they wanted a whole additional feature with a plugin installed and all this stuff, and then they're like, I actually don't like this, sometimes it's easier to just literally roll back. Sometimes it didn't work out in a technical capacity, and you have to report to them saying, hey, this isn't how we thought it was going to be. And then they're like, I don't want this anymore. Sometimes it's nice to just be able to actually roll it back rather than like uninstalling. Again, if we're talking WordPress, uninstalling plugins, messing around with different features, making sure the database is okay, testing it. Like sometimes it's better to just say, okay, we're going back to the day right before you said you didn't want this anymore. So just a couple of tips and tricks there. Something that will kind of relieve your stress when pushing to production. As we've talked in the past, pushing to production can be a real pain. So it's just one of those things where, I have everything. So if something goes wrong, I can always just re-upload this. It's not a big deal. It's not gone. I just have to push it back up to the server. Also, be wary if you have like CLI access. Be wary of new commands. Again, especially if you have command line access, so that'd be in your server, or if you have a VPS or something like that from a hosting company. Like, really be wary. Like, I can't stress this enough, of new commands. If you're not really into Linux, or you're not really into whatever platform you're using, you could even be having a Windows VPS, and you don't really know what the command is doing. This is especially true if it's aimed at deleting files or folders. This is like a really, really critical thing is just be wary of those commands. Have backups of things. Make sure that you're not just running commands willy-nilly. Maybe if you have a test server somewhere, absolutely go and test it on there. Just don't type in any command because we all know it. You go to Stack Overflow, you don't read the whole thread, you copy like some random command from there, you paste it in, and then bang, you deleted a whole folder with subfolders, and that was somebody's blog post, one of your client's blog posts, and that's no good. So make sure you're wary of those commands. That's really, really critical. Also, have a recovery plan before you begin so that you can quickly and easily roll back your changes if something goes terribly wrong. And planning this out properly may require you to take full backups, prepare a re-upload solution, research reinstallation information on some software you're using, whether that be WordPress or Couch CMS or some other CMS out there, or some other software or some other web app thing. Whatever you're using, there's tons of stuff out there that would require reinstallation upon a recovery. Again, depending on your whole situation. Just make sure that you have a recovery plan first. So, get that folder ready that has all the WordPress content or whatever it is. And I keep coming back to WordPress, but WordPress always comes up when it comes to recoveries and that type of thing, just because it is so popular. And so, have that WordPress content folder ready, or have those assets ready if you're moving images around. And then if something goes terribly wrong and that folder gets deleted or corrupted, you can just delete the corrupted one and put up the good fresh one. Write an FTP so there's minimal delay, minimal downtime. You're not getting phone calls. You're not having panic on your end. Just have that recovery plan. And like I said, sometimes it can be in depth, researching and all that stuff, but it really does alleviate a lot of stress when you are pushing to production or changing things in production. It really, really makes a lot of sense. And also, even if it doesn't save you in your first few times that you need to do something, it will save you one day. We've had issues where we've done changes before doing a backup, and then it's a whole scenario, and if it takes down the whole site, then it's, well, now what do we do? How do we roll this back? And it's a whole disaster when, oh, I took an hour while watching TV to do a backup. I just confirmed it was okay. It's not super technical. I'm just backing things up over FTP or whatever system you have, and then bang, you can just move along with your day, kind of just pushing everything back up and going back, and you can report to the client, hey, I had to roll this back, or hey, this is what the status of this is, but it's not down. That's the key thing. Always try to avoid that downtime. That's killer, especially in the server world. Also, have a testing environment. So really have a testing environment that truly mimics your production environment. Preferably that's exactly what you want. So, don't be using Nginx in one and then Apache in production. Apache and Apache, hopefully, similar versions of PHP, similar versions of this and that, whatever you're using, try to mimic your production scenario in testing as much as you can, because you can always test things there. Sometimes you can even, depending on if it's public facing, if your test server is public facing to some degree, you can even show a client one of those changes that you think is questionable on your test server and be like, hey, this is what it would look like. Do you like it? And that actually will completely eliminate if they say, oh, I want to roll it back. You didn't even do it. All you did was do it in tests, and that's it. And once you do it in testing, it's going to be easy generally for you to do it in production. You're going to have a procedure written down, whether you documented it or whether you just remember it. And whether it's usually in server stuff, you don't have to write too much down. In my experience, a lot of it you'll remember. However, things that confuse you absolutely should write down. You absolutely should write down, so that if you're doing it on your test server, you can easily push those updates to your production server without making a mistake. You want to have the same successful procedure on your testing environment that you have on your production environment. So make sure you write all that stuff down if you need to. Sometimes it's just moving a file around and you don't really need to write that down. And that's basically it for the server stuff. There's a lot more tips and tricks I could get into, but that's kind of the real basics and real generic stuff. Maybe I'll do another segment in the future about something more specific, like a cPanel or something. We'll see. There's a lot we could talk about, and a lot of things that we as server admins have done wrong over the years, and a lot of procedures that have saved a lot of us as well. So I'll move on to more of the web development side. So, CSS. So don't be afraid of simply setting up a skeleton before moving on to a different part of the site. So having a skeleton of the top bar while the branding's being figured out by another team, or whether the client is getting their logo done or their colors done or whatever. Don't sit there and dwell and be like, well, I've started the nav bar, but I have to wait. No. You can set up the skeleton of the nav bar, and then just kind of, that frees up some more time so you can spend on other elements. You can just do the skeleton of the nav bar and then go work on the slider, or you can go work on the contact form, something that's more concrete that won't really change too much as the project is kind of being developed. So just that's one kind of it's a really simple but a major tip, because we oftentimes will get kind of like stuck, bogged down, be sitting there with this nav bar being like, man, I wish I knew what the color was, and man, I wish I knew this, man, I wish I knew that. But you could be working on that slider, and if you bang out an hour or two on each element, let's say on each little segment of the site, the slider, the contact form, the nav bar, now those hours are already invested in that, and now that's saved time later on. So you're not just sitting there waiting, and then when the client actually does come with the branding and the full let's say the full design spec or whatever you were waiting for, you can just implement that part. You're not starting from scratch on each element. Also, especially with a nav bar, you're freeing up buttons and that type of thing for the backend dev. Oftentimes the backend dev, and Mike and I have had this exchange several times, the backend dev will oftentimes need to kind of talk to the buttons, like change the buttons, like move the buttons around, make buttons for them to test, like, they'll make like button 1, and the backend dev will be clicking on it to see if it's affecting the database, etc. Or they'll be setting up the structure of just the pages, like just the making sure their system dynamically generates the pages, let's say, and making sure that the nav bar actually navigates. So you're really freeing, depending on your scenario in terms of your development environment with your colleagues, you're really like freeing up a lot of time, and you're also possibly helping somebody else, especially if you're doing something that complements their work. Don't delay them as well. Just just keep pressing on. Any hour that you invest is generally an hour that you don't have to do later. And that's really, really key. And that's something we've learned also in writing, especially these show notes. Once we start writing, it's fine, but we'll be sitting there being like, what should we name the episode? Don't get caught up on that. Just move along. It's a general tip, and it's also a specific CSS tip. It's something that's really, really critical, I think, in this business. Just get started and just go. Also, make your class names easily identifiable. So there's a bunch of like standard naming conventions that we've talked about in the past that you could use. However, if you're not using something like that, you should be able to identify what you named later on. And also other developers should be able to identify what you named later on. So example, class names really easy is navbar, nav item, footer, top bar, real easy, real like simple to understand. And that also allows them, if they are converting the project to have a standard naming scheme, they're still able to read your class names and, just, find and replace all those class names and just replace them with whatever proper notation that they'd like to be using. Just something that's really small and that we always learn in programming. Make sure your variables are descriptive and you can read them. It's the same thing with CSS, but just with class names. They're essentially, in terms of native CSS, they're essentially our variable names. And so you should be doing the same thing. Keep it simple, keep it descriptive. Also, comments. And this goes for other languages other than just CSS as well, but it's something that I've kind of done for myself, and it really helps me out. So comments should be done to clarify things for yourself in the future, or for other developers down the road. However, sometimes you understand something using references in your own head. So don't hesitate to make comments that are specific to you if you're actively working on the project, using references that only you understand, and then make the comment more generic for others when production hits. So whether that means you write a generic comment and then below it you add an additional kind of footnote to that comment, where you're adding something that you understand it. So one of the things, I think it was for Free Photos Hamilton actually, one of the things that we did was I could never remember the plugin names. I think we were using some sort of vendor plugin name, and then we were using WooCommerce, and I couldn't remember the plugin name for the vendor. I think it was. I don't even remember it now, but I couldn't remember that name for whatever reason. And so I literally just put like this triggers the vendor thing page or something. And I remember Mike back in the day was like, what the hell is this? But I knew what that was. And so it doesn't help him. And so in a true production environment, I should do something that actually describes what's going on. But since I'm rapid fire trying to finish this site, and that's what we were doing at that time, that comment helped me. I look at it and go, oh, vendor thing? I know what that is. And I just move along. So don't hesitate to do stuff like that. Don't be too formal with your comments. In production, sure, make sure it's all good for your team and all that, but just bang it out. Go. Get it done. Make sure your comments allow you to quickly pick up on what's going on, and then you just move along. Also, test responsivity with true window widths and not just responsive tools. So sometimes these tools don't reflect exactly how different browser window widths will actually react. And this can result in some really weird like overflow issues. So, the classic where the page is scrolling, you're only supposed to be able to go up and down, but you're scrolling left to right a little bit. Like there's that little bit of wiggle room in there. That's because something's like overflowing. It's pushing itself out. Also, sometimes things can just break entirely where they're not confining to the proper window width at a certain size or whatever. The situation could be anything really, but it's usually overflow. And oftentimes it's because people have only tested things within one of those responsive testers. So, you right click on Chrome, you right click, inspect element, and you can click that little responsivity button. And you can check the different device sizes and that type of thing. We use that all the time, to be clear. But there's sometimes, and it's not super rare. There's sometimes with that tool where we'll be like, this thing is overflowing, and it's absolutely not supposed to be. Like, I'm literally telling it in a CSS property not to overflow what's going on. And then I'll just take the window, that tab, and I'll literally just shrink it down to the size that I'm testing on, like just physically the whole window, and it'll work just fine. Or I'll test it on a phone and it'll work just fine. And sometimes just resetting, opening and closing that responsive tool will fix it. It's just because, it's just some sort of bug or something like that with the responsive tool. But it's absolutely something to keep in mind, because when started happening on more of our complex projects, we were like, great, we don't know how to use, like, I don't know how to use CSS, I guess, because I'm telling this thing not to do it. It's doing it anyway. What's going on? And then I would go and test it on the phone to see how bad it looked. And I'd be like, oh, it actually looks how I think it's supposed to. What's going on here? So it's just a small but like really critical tip to save you some time is if it's acting weird, just take a moment, put it into like a real window width of, 100 or not, maybe not 100, but like 500 or whatever you're testing on, 500 pixels wide, and be like, oh, okay, it is actually reacting the way I think it's supposed to. I'm testing it on the device or whatever. It's working fine. Let's move along here. Let's not dwell on this specific responsivity. So just something that we learned, or something that I learned over the years, was don't always trust your tools. Test the real thing. See how it goes. Let's pass it on to Mike now for segment number 2, which is going to be his tips, unless he has any comments on my tips.
Yeah, for sure. I have a couple comments actually, Matt. So the last point that you had really resonated with me as well. I had some issues where the Chrome dev tools weren't displaying my application the same way that the device that I was coding on was displaying it, and I couldn't figure out why. I think it was something to do with the pixel ratio though. So you can adjust pixel ratio, but even adjusting the pixel ratio, I couldn't get some of the elements to display. Anyway, so you definitely brought up the correct thing. The other thing I would say is test on the devices that you're going to be using the application on. As many devices as you can, at least. If you have friends with some devices, send it to them, ask them to test it, take some pictures for you and stuff like that, just to use all the resources available at your disposal to be able to, get a good picture of how your application is performing, not just like the Chrome dev tools or just Chrome. Use all the browsers as well. They render stuff differently. So that was definitely a good point. And the other thing is that your first point, the don't be afraid to simply set up a skeleton, or in other words, don't be afraid to just start. That was a huge point for me. Like right now, when I design web pages, when I start coding, I'm not a huge fan of CSS. I don't like HTML that much. I'm more of a front end dev, JavaScript guy, and back end dev. So when I do any sort of layouts, I kind of just quickly put something up on the page and start working on functionality. And that definitely helps me move forward instead of having to like dwell on the fact that, oh, I don't want to do this, or, oh, I don't want to get started. I want to just kind of work on functionality. Being able to just quickly get a structure set up is a huge thing for me. And I definitely use the skeleton structure first, and then I go back and I kind of adjust it and make it responsive in the end if I have to. So definitely some good tips there. So thanks, Matt. I'll move on to my tips though, which are going to be just basically covering JavaScript. And I'm going to try to keep it mostly just base JavaScript. Not going to get into too much of our usual, like any sort of framework stuff. This is just going to be kind of very basic JavaScript tips for a beginner dev, and hopefully will help you out. So one thing I learned while coding is, when you have a big application with either multiple pages or it's a large single page application, I like to maintain a thing called a scope variable. So a scope variable in general is like what's in scope at that current time, or in other words, it's a kind of a global variable. And you're told not to have a global variable or not to use global variables, but sometimes you need to pass state between files, pass state between big functions and stuff like that. So what I like to do is I like to have only one global variable called scope, and then add objects and variables to that scope variable. So I know anytime in my code where I see scope, that's using that scope variable that I defined initially, and I kind of use that as my place, of passing in objects. If you're into reactive frameworks, it's kind of like your state management system. So this kind of helps your code be a little bit more structured, and it minimizes conflicts. It's not the ideal solution, I don't think, but it's definitely better than just having 100 global variables and then having to manage that through all your files and making sure that you don't have conflicts with the same name and stuff like that. Whereas with scope, it's a lot more structured. So that's my tip number 1 kind of thing. Next thing is use libraries when necessary. So when working on larger projects, you're always going to have that situation where you're going to run into a time limit. You're going to have to build out a lot of features. You have to build it by the end of the week. So there's some things that you're just not going to be able to build yourself, even though you know how to do it. So there's libraries that could really save you a huge amount of time and headache. So for instance, I recently had to create a searchable list for an application with the ability where the user can type in something in that list, and it'll auto filter that list live as you're typing something in. So even though this is definitely something that I could have created from scratch, I didn't want to waste my client's time, and I had a deadline. And so I thought that was unnecessary. I did a quick Google search. It yielded a plenty of well-maintained, small, feature-rich libraries. One was called list.js. It really exceeded my expectations. I kind of went through it. So there's some tips for picking a library, right? Like there's some libraries that I would not suggest you do, but here's some tips, like some general tips for picking a library if you're going to go that route. So make sure it has been updated in the past year at least. So sometimes libraries don't get updated at all over 3 or 4 years, and that can really put a hindrance on your code where, there's some features that don't work because some things have been deprecated. There's some security issues that could arise. There's many different things that could happen. So I like to make sure that at least within a year, something's been updated. For instance, list.js, that library was updated in the past month. So, I'm fairly confident in the fact that it's maintained. The next thing is I really make sure that the documentation is really easy to understand and simple. I go through it really quick, making sure like, oh, I get that. Maybe there's something that I kind of like don't fully understand, but that's okay. As long as I understand 90% of it, I feel like that I can move forward and use that application or that library. The other thing is that I always go to the open issues tab and I check how many closed issues there are, how many open issues there are, and then I look how the creator or how the community kind of interacts with each other in it. If people are helpful, if the creator is helpful in solving issues like in the closed issues tab and people seem to be satisfied with it, or I can follow how he's solving it and I understand and I'm you're okay with how he's helping, then I think that's a really good indicator of how of using a library, because you might run into an issue. I've had plenty of times where I have used libraries and been like, oh shoot, I can't get past this thing, so I'll either go in and try to fix it myself and then I'll post in the help, or I'll go in and open an issue and ask for help inside of it. This is a huge thing for me. So those are kind of like the basic tips for choosing a library when you're out there and you need to get one of those a functionality built out really quickly. So the next thing is do your best to write self-documenting code with comments being used only when necessary. This is kind of my strategy, and I've been using this throughout my code, and it seems to have been working fine. So what the thing is that I'm very deliberate in my function and variable names, and it makes it really easy to go back to my code and understand what's going on in the future. So I've had to go back to 2-year-old, 3-year-old code, and I can usually understand what's going on just by reading the name of like a function. For instance, if you're calculating tax on a product, name that function calculate tax. Don't name it something obscure like calculate or math. Like don't give it a name that's going to confuse you in the future of what this function is doing. Use the fact that we can use alphanumeric letters to name your functions like you would, write a book or something like that. So name your functions, name your variables, make sure that they're very, easily readable, easily understood as you go through them. And obviously when you need to explain something with comments, explain it, especially with choices. Sometimes in your code, there will be some choices you can make where, for the dev environment, you can put like 100 milliseconds for this or 200 milliseconds. So it goes a little bit slower so you can debug it or whatever. Make sure that those kinds of things are definitely commented where you would change that, where you would change the dev environment variables and stuff like that. And then obviously if something's really obscure or something's very complicated, try to add a couple of comments. Don't go crazy with the commenting, but make sure you have a couple comments in there to know what's going on. I tend to avoid using too many comments anyway. So the other thing is I try to avoid using ternary operators in code that has to be maintained over time. And a ternary operator is that like one-line if statement. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but you can type it in to Google and check it out for yourself. But pretty much it's just a condition with a question mark and then the true expression. So if the condition is true, this is what happens, and then the false expression. So this is kind of the else condition after a colon. So it's a one-line if statement, and I understand they look really clean and they look really easy to write, but the problem is it's not as easy to read as a simple if statement, if else statement, and there's no real reason to use them. Because it doesn't make anything faster. It doesn't, like, execution does not perform faster with the ternary operator as opposed to a regular if statement. So it's really just you trying to use a new skill that you learned for not much good reason, or to look professional, quote unquote. So I try to avoid using ternary operators as much as I can. if I need to just toggle a variable, sometimes true or false, I'll sometimes use that. That would be the only case where I've actually used it in my production code. So the next thing is refactor and clean up your code often. And this is something that I really need to take my own advice on and go back to some of my projects and refactor them, especially client projects where, time is money. I need to you need to present your client with a quote or an idea that we need to maintain this code in the future. Let's spend a couple hours, go back and let me refactor the code. Make sure that it's maintainable, to the years to come. So with larger projects, code can get out of hand really fast. If you're programming at speed, especially, and do a lot of testing where you comment out sections, write new ones, and see the differences of those comment out sections, those kinds of like blocks of commented out code can add up and really add to confusion and maintainability in the future. Like, why do you have a bunch of commented out sections here? Like, does this one work? Does this one not work? When you come back to it 2 years later, you won't know. So the idea is you want to go back and make sure that those are removed. Make sure that the ones that are working are there and properly named, commented, whatever. And then the other thing is you can sometimes preemptively create a lot of variables at the start and a lot of functions and then never go back and use them, or use them once and then be like, oh no, I can use a different function for this, and then not delete those functions. So they're just taking up memory for no reason. You don't want to, make a bunch of variables and not use them. That's actually taking up space and memory on the person's computer. So make sure that you go back and definitely look through and delete those. They're also a prime candidate for confusion, and a huge thing to do when you refactor. Oh, those are just a couple of things. There's plenty of things you can do when you refactor, like clean up spaces, tabs, however you like your code. Make sure you add those semicolons and stuff. I know that linting can do this for you, but a lot of newer developers don't want to get into all the different tools like that right away, because you want to learn how code is structured yourself first and then kind of use tools to help you. In my opinion, that's how you should go about it. And then the last tip that I have is Chrome DevTools are your friend. And this is a huge one. I'm potentially thinking about making a whole episode on Chrome DevTools, so I'm not going to go too far into this. I'm just going to point out that they're a huge help for me on a daily basis. And being able to put a breakpoint in my code and then view all the variables at that certain breakpoint, like what the state is of all the variables in my entire application at that breakpoint, is a huge help when I'm testing my code. It definitely makes it a lot easier to know where to put the variables, where to put the function. Sometimes I'll just put a quick function, put a breakpoint in there in that function, just see where everything's at, and then I'll continue writing that function. Just using the tools that are there for your advantage is definitely a huge help. And before I learned about Chrome DevTools, I was definitely a much slower and using console logs a lot more developer. Chrome DevTools accelerated my development and also made me a better developer in total. So thank you to Chrome DevTools, that's for sure. And that's really it for my quick JavaScript tips and tricks. I don't know. I'm gonna probably pass it off to Matt if he has any comments, or I'll move on to the web news. Matt.
No, I think those are all super legitimate tips, and I think we're good for web news, because I think it's going to be quite controversial and quite. I think it's going to be interesting, this web news. I think it's going to drive some conversation for sure.
All right, let's do it then. So web news this week: software as a service. Now we've kind of talked about this off and on in our podcast, so I'm just going to reiterate a bunch of stuff here. And then we'll have a conversation as we usually do with Matt. So, with most software companies moving on to a monthly or yearly subscription model, has standalone applications now become a complete unicorn in our industry. Not software as a service applications. So paying only $5 to $20 a month for a premium application seems like an easier sell to people than asking them for $100 up front, or $200-$300. But these $5 to $20 a month add up fairly quickly, and eventually, you can check out your statements and stuff like that, and you can see that it's probably going to be a bigger hit on your wallet in the future if you're going to be paying constantly over and over again for that application. Knowing you never own the actual product is also a weird feeling. Like, I know before you would buy a copy of Microsoft Office, and then it would sit there in a box, and you could just take it. If you have another computer, just install it on that computer. No money, nothing. Just install it there, make sure that it's like deleted off your old computer, and you're good to go. Now that we don't have that, you're kind of like, oh, where is it? Is it in the, like, I have to be connected online, I have to go log into my account, I have to be paying this $20 a month, so it's not really yours. Like, you never feel like any application is yours to own anymore. It's like you're just renting it from them, which is a weird feeling for someone that's grown up owning a lot of applications. So it's kind of an interesting thought, like mind game that you have to play with yourself, being like, oh, I can use this application, but it's not mine. It's, as soon as I stop paying for it, it's gone. So, and then the other, like, on the positive side, for a company, having consistent recurring income is a huge bonus for them and allows them to plan much further ahead with features and support. So that obviously that can trickle down to the user as well. Also, very few yearly version upgrades happen. So like, you don't get those, massive upgrades from, 2012 to 2013 to 2014 to 2015 like you used to, where you would have to migrate your whole team or your whole department to a new version. Usually when you have a monthly subscription service, your version kind of just updates as you go, maybe on a monthly, maybe on a bi-monthly basis. And you don't notice those upgrades as often as you would one of those massive migrations. So for an IT professional, I can see this being a huge help, and a very big driving cost factor too, because having to go through that process of updating all those computers is a lot of time, and time is money in IT. So it makes sense for them to consider a monthly or a yearly subscription model just to alleviate that cost. So that's a benefit in my opinion. And then in my experience, companies that get a monthly subscription are less likely to abandon their product. I know just one quick example that popped into my head was an app called Weather Timeline for Android. It was a really, like, the best weather app I've ever used at that point. I think it was like $3 to buy. There was no monthly subscription or anything like that, and everyone was like raving about it. It had really high reviews on the App Store. People were like commenting about it on Reddit, and like it was for a weather app, it was quite a big deal for some reason. But what happened was, after a year or two, I guess the sales slowed down, and the people that bought it were still using it because it was a good application. And the person that was developing it was using a kind of a service on his end where he was pulling data from a paid API. And so as the people kept buying it and not paying consistently for it, he wasn't able to afford that API anymore. So he had to actually take it off the Play Store. We didn't delete it on our devices, but he's like, I can't sell it anymore. Like, this $3, a one-time $3 fee is not cutting it. And I don't want to put a subscription model on people that have already paid for it and stuff like that. He's like, I'm just going to stop selling it because I don't want the headache. And eventually it led to him actually selling his application to a different publisher. That publisher went in, stripped out a bunch of features that were costing, the API money, made the application a lot worse, and so on and so forth. So like, those kinds of things are very much, they happen less often with a monthly subscription model, because you can always rely on that income coming in every month from your subscribers, and you can kind of plan ahead a little bit more, like I said in my previous points. So that I find that as a positive, like, knowing you're paying monthly, but then you're going to be using this application for a while. So it makes it seem more logical, in my opinion. So those are kind of my positives and negatives, and the landscape that I see the software as a service industry being in right now. So the question is, what do you prefer? A one-time bulk payment of $100+, $100, $200, or a $5 to $20 subscription fee per month for all your applications? So I'm going to pass it off to Matt to kind of give his input on that question.
I think those are really good points, because one of the things that I always kind of thought with a subscription fee, and I mean, it is true, is that the companies want to have recurring revenue. They want to make more money. They want to have a more consistent income level rather than release an application, get an influx of cash. The sales peter down, and then they have to, spin up a new version or spin up a new piece of software or whatever. So this is kind of like, essentially revenue forever, assuming the application is still relevant. And that's great for them so that they can keep up the support. And I really didn't think of it that much. Like, I understood that was one of the things that does happen. But one of the things I always equated it to was like them making an excuse. It's like when somebody changes something that is worse for the consumer in general. companies and whoever is doing it will start to fish for excuses. It's the same reason why like a fanboy of something will start making excuses for what they're a fan of if said thing starts to fail. We see that time and time again. It's just like a defense mechanism that we're using to like, either defer the consumer or defer our friends if we're trying to defend something we like that's failing. It's just, and that's kind of how I always equated it. But I never really thought of like the paid APIs, the fact that everything's live now. I didn't really think it through fully. However, I will say that I am a fan of subscription fees for things I use a lot. So I kind of have like, I think it's actually all of them, although I could be wrong. All the Microsoft subscriptions, but I also use them to death. I have like the personal Office 365. We have Office 365 for business. I have the Game Pass, Xbox Live. I have EA Access, which is like there's free EA, but it's through Xbox Live, however that works. So it's like I have all of the subscriptions, but I use all these services enough that I really like that. And one of the things that I had actually discussed when Windows 10 was coming out was I would actually be down for, give me 5 Windows licenses. I'll pay you X amount per month. And then that's it. And I can just have 5 Windows licenses. I don't have to worry about it. I type in my key. I have a similar license managing thing like I do with Word now with Office 365 Personal. And that's it. And I can have it on 5 computers, and I'm paying a subscription because I'm using Windows each and every day, multiple times a day on multiple devices. If something goes wrong with one of my Windows installations, I don't want to worry about OEM keys and installation limits and all this other crap. I just want, here's your 5 licenses or 3 licenses or whatever they're going to give you, and that's it. And so I think it's really great when you use something to death. However, when you're using something occasionally, I think it starts to get a little bit ridiculous. One of the things I think is a little bit ridiculous, and it's a service that we use here at HTML All the Things, is Medium. I have one of those Medium Premium or whatever the heck it's called subscriptions because a lot of the articles that were showing up in my recommended were like members only. And so I signed up for that. Now I understand it's $5 a month, whatever, however much it is. We're in Canada, so I'm not really sure what the conversion is and all that. But it's like around $5 a month, but it's $5 a month. And then Netflix goes up in price. I use Netflix to death, but like I told Mike, I'm like, once it hits $20, I think I'm out. We got YouTube. You can watch YouTube for free, but they keep putting more ads. So now it's like now you could potentially get ads on there that last like a decent amount of time, and there's multiples of them. So now it's like a pain in the ass. So now you could potentially buy a subscription there. But I don't use YouTube a heck of a lot. I don't read a heck of a lot on Medium. I don't use these services as much as like I use Netflix a lot, but it's still not quite enough at the $20 mark. Now it's still below that. I'm not saying it's at $20 by any means, even in Canada, but it's still hitting the point where I'm just getting sick of paying these subscription fees. In terms of, again, the Microsoft ones, with the exception of like the gaming ones, but that's like for my leisure time. The ones that are for Office and for our email and that type of thing, that is literally has like a monetary value associated with it essentially. Like you could boil down me using Windows, and I understand Windows doesn't actually have that subscription thing that I said, but hypothetically, if it did, if there was a Microsoft subscription service that just had everything, you could boil it down in terms of like how much money it costs or I'm making versus the cost. Like maybe I'm paying $1 an hour in terms of my usage, and I'm making like 10 an hour or something. Like it's because I use these services so much and I'm using them constantly that it makes sense. I want to have the latest version. I want it to be up to date, etc., etc., etc. But the issue is that when these other services, like I've said, have come in, it's like, oh, here's a subscription. Like I have a subscription to a VPN program. It's not even a VPN like not like NordVPN or any of those. It's not like one of those where I VPN my connection. It's called Hamachi. I don't know if you guys have ever used it. And that's so that we used to do like game servers back in the day in college. And so I have like a subscription to that because I use it for a few other things as well. It can be used for other things other than game servers, but it's still an occasional use, and I have a subscription to that. I can't even use Amazon anymore without a Prime membership. I mean, you can, I'm saying, but me, it's like I have to have this Prime membership now because I use the service so much. Now, admittedly, Amazon is one of those cases where I am using it quite a bit, like I said, and I'm probably actually saving more in shipping costs than I am paying for the subscription. So that is a good thing, but it's still like, this is a shop. Like, this is essentially a shop, a store, a digital store, and I'm paying for a subscription. It's like Costco. It's like, what's going on here? Like, you're getting dinged every month at every turn now. It's not like I'm getting dinged for my most used things. If I could pay like, I don't know, $300 for Netflix forever, which it won't happen, but if I could, that'd be great. But it's not going to happen because it's sort of like cable in that it has new stuff all the time. But it's just getting to the point where I'm just getting sick of this constant barrage, and like your credit card statement like blows up, and it's not by like thousands or anything like that. It's not like totally out of control because I don't take on new subscriptions lightly, but it is still like, oh fuck, I didn't realize this was going to be $50 more because I forgot these 3 subscriptions, plus the fact that I own all these domains or whatever, plus this, plus like all these little things. Like, I know, and like domains aren't necessarily a subscription, but they're a yearly cost too. And so everything is like a recurring cost. And so it's no longer something, it's hard to budget things now because it's just like recurring. And it's intelligent for these companies to do it, and it's the same reason why people will have free apps and then have ads like we're doing, because that's recurring as well, because you're almost like a fool if you don't go recurring these days. But in the same breath, it's still taking away, like it's still taking something away from the service. It's like, I can't just have this service, I can't just own this app. Like, again, Netflix is a bit different, but like, if I can't just own, I could just own Word, but it's like super expensive up front. Like, that is one of the programs that I can still, as far as I know, buy a one-time use license where they update it for X amount of time and then it just stops being updated and I can use it in its old traditional sense. But it doesn't really make sense for me to do that. I'm caught in this loop of something being necessary versus something being necessary in the moment. You know, if something is necessary and long-term necessary, I use it all the time for years to come. If something is like, I need it that night and I'm just going to have to sign up for this subscription service, like, it's a pain in the ass. One key thing is, like, I like to kind of mess around with a DSLR here and there. And like, I don't want to buy Lightroom, like, for the subscription. It's the subscription that's holding me back. If it was like $200 and I got a year's worth of updates, I'd probably do that. Honestly, because it's $200 and that's it. And it's $200 and that's it. Like that's the end of the story. You know what I mean? If it gets old and decrepit over the years, I can pay another $200 or whatever it is and get another one. But I don't, like, I'm not getting a rich experience from Lightroom because I don't use it a lot. I'm a hobbyist. And people can say, well, they don't have the full Creative Cloud thing. Like, you don't have to do the whole Creative Cloud. You could do the photography thing. I don't care. I don't want to pay it. Like, it's just a little ridiculous. Could you imagine a subscription for service, which, I mean, there are some upgrade services for your cell phone, for your smartphone? Could you imagine paying a certain amount of, like, you're paying off a loan on it, but what if you could, like, just buy a subscription? And there are some similar services with updating your phone every year, updating your phone every 2 years, or whatever it is. There are similar services from carriers or from manufacturers that offer something like that. But I think it's honestly, and it's my opinion fully, it's that they're testing the waters for, can a subscription work? There's ad-supported phones on Amazon to get a lower cost. It's just, we're being bombarded with either mass subscriptions, mass ads, like everything's recurring now. And I think the issue is could you imagine if you paid off, like, if you're one of those people that just buy a car, you don't take a financial plan on it, and you just buy a car. Could you imagine paying a subscription to, like, Buick or someone? Could you imagine doing it to, like, GM, Ford? Doesn't matter. Could you imagine paying a subscription to use that car? Like, they have something similar. It's called leasing or renting, but still, imagine that was the only option. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where everything came from. I think it actually trickled down to the software industry from cars and from, like, those industries, right? Because those industries kind of brought it into normal practice to get someone to pay for something that they don't own on a monthly basis. Like, when you're leasing a car, you don't own that car. When you're leasing a water heater, you don't own that water heater. You're paying monthly for something that you don't own. Granted, you're getting the advantages of not having to worry about servicing it, as much or something like that. Like I think with cars, you still have to service them, to be honest, even though you don't own them for whatever reason. Like I'd probably just drive it into the ground until it like ground the brakes ground into the rotors. I don't care. It's not my car. But like it's a weird system. And you're definitely right in those occasional ones. Like if I'm using something occasionally, I don't want to pay for it for a month. I want to pay a one-time fee and use it occasionally for the rest of my life, kind of thing. Like I don't want to deal with the fact that I have to pay for like, and we do pay for it. Like we do pay for the Creative Cloud for Adobe. I use Adobe very rarely. Now granted, now my wife uses it more often now here and there, so at least we're getting some use out of it, but like I use it very rarely. I could probably get away with just GIMP, to be honest. I think we bought Adobe because there was a bunch of times where clients would send us files in Adobe's format and we couldn't convert them into GIMP, or it went in GIMP they looked wrong and stuff like that. So we kind of like, what choice do we have, right? Like, okay, so then I guess we have to pay monthly for Adobe just for those occasional clients that send us the files, and that's kind of like the logic here.
And also you're not getting value from that. Like you're helping that client, but you're not getting the same value out.
Absolutely not. Yeah, exactly. Like it's a requirement, but it sucks like that we have to pay monthly for that. Like I would have much rather paid, $100, $200 one time and then just gotten Adobe Photoshop, and we're not going to pirate it because that's, we're a business. We can't do that. So the other thing is that like a lot of companies, like you said with Microsoft, you can still buy a one-time purchase Microsoft Office. You're definitely correct about that. I just checked it. I actually thought you couldn't. But the reason I thought you couldn't was because they do an extremely good job of making it seem like you can't. Like every first advertisement you see is for Office 365. Everything that when you type in Microsoft Office, buy Microsoft Office, whatever you type in, it's always going to be Office 365, which is a yearly subscription or a monthly, however you want to pay for it, for Office. But the problem is that even when you get to the point where you can purchase it, they have like a comparison of the three. Obviously, like logically, you go for like your mind goes for a cheaper price point. So you see in the middle here is a $79 price point a year for Office 365 Personal. Plus, you get all these applications like Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Publisher, Access, like all those things. OneDrive, terabyte of OneDrive space, Skype, stuff like that. The problem is with when you go for the other one, the one-time purchase, here you only get Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So Outlook, no, you don't get Outlook, and it costs $169 for that one-time purchase. So they're making it very clear that they want you to buy the Office 365 subscription. Like it's not like it is a choice, but really, is it a choice? Like when you get there, like are you actually gonna buy the one-time purchase? They're making it a very deliberate move here to make it so that people buy the subscription, and it's 100% working, because I didn't even know that the one-time purchase existed until you said it right now, and I had to go and look it up. So these kinds of things are kind of like, I don't know if it's just shady business practice or whatever. Like I understand again, we've discussed it just now, why they want to do this. But stuff that I use considerably less than regularly, I don't want to pay for a subscription service for, and you're 100% right. There should be an option. Like there should be an option for me to buy it. I don't know. Like I don't really have too much more to add to this, because it is what it is, because I don't think it's going to be going anywhere. Like in my opinion, it's only going to get worse. Like I don't think we're going to have ownable applications in the future. I think that all applications, including phone applications, like I think that the phone applications are going to go to monthly subscription services. Like, because like what I said with Weather Timeline, it's just not sustainable, especially because all the APIs are now expensive. They're monthly and they're user based. Like paying $3 for an application is no longer reasonable to these developers who have big teams and like large costs up front. They need that like $5-10 a month to be able to maintain their application. That's it. I think the Play Store will very quickly transition to a more monthly subscription model. Maybe you'll be able to buy like a package where like you pay $20 a month and you can use these applications, and that's going to be within that package or something. I don't know, but I think that that's the future where we're heading to, even mobile in mobile services and everything else. Like I don't see one-time purchases being a thing anymore. I know for a fact that AutoCAD, because my dad works in the AutoCAD space, has moved completely to a monthly subscription model. You can't purchase a one-time one-time license anymore. You have to purchase it monthly, and like stuff like that. Like even professional software is starting to become monthly, right? So I don't see it going back.
I'm just trying to like process this. I think it's one of those things where I really actually agree with your conglomerate thing. I think maybe it won't get worse, but it's not going to get better. Maybe at some point, like it might get worse from here, but then it might plateau because eventually people will just not want to pay. And then we're going to see things like the one subscription. We're going to see things like whatever. I'm just making something up. And that one subscription is like, oh, that's Office 365 and that's this and that's that and that's this movie service. And we're going to see these companies come out of the woodwork that deal, like basically it's going to be a company that deals with companies that have subscription fees to make packages to sell you packages. Sound familiar there, cable industry? So, you know what I'm trying to say? Like it sounds like the cable industry trying to sell you a bundle of channels. And then you said there's already that value proposition with Office 365 with Outlook and whatever else. So if there's a value proposition in a package, are you really just going to want to buy Netflix for $15 a month or for $25 a month? Do you want Netflix and one other video service like Crave, which is in Canada? And do you want to have Office 365 for 6 months for free? Oh, and then for an extra $2 a month after that, you can have that Office 365 forever, but for one user. And you can upgrade that for a premium.
Yep.
That's probably where we're going. That's a really good point. That's probably where we're going. And I'll be there. I'll be there at my Visa, getting ready, getting all fired up. But I hate to cut this conversation short. Admittedly, we did chat it up pretty good, but I do have to take off because I'm the only person with a car in our family at the moment, so I got to take some people to the hospital. But I believe this was a pretty full episode. Unless you have any more concluding notes there, Mike, let's close her off for the day.
Yep, I'm good to go. All
right, so thank you for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. You can also follow us on the socials via @HTML All the Things. That's on Facebook and Instagram, and also at HTML Everything, which is on Twitter. We are on Medium. We're also on GitHub, and we're also on Patreon, like we said, patreon.com/HTML All the Things. Check out the tiers, give that a go, and feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform you are listening to this on, and we are signing off.